Oh, yeah. Did we do that last time?
Doesn't matter. I've been setting the YouTube.
Okay.
You're good.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if anybody's here. Although I already see Ivan's in the house with the Velociraptor. Ivan, it is time. And what is it time for, my friends? It's time for World Regional Geography, aka World Regions Online Live Office Hour, where we talk about the events happening around planet Earth, and I attempt to enlighten all of you tuning in to perhaps some details and behind the scenes things that help you understand the current events happening in the world. Although the disclaimer, of course, is I am a generalist. I am not a studied auteur or true academic in any specific field. So if you're looking for detailed answers, or someone randomly on Twitch or on planet Earth taps into this and they're like, this guy doesn't know nothing, he doesn't have a PhD in Russian politics, you are correct. I do not. I am a last of a dying breed of proud generalists that generally understand what's going on planet Earth and can enlighten, again, on some things behind the scenes. Mostly because I'm freaking old. But before I get to the freaking old part, let me welcome any first-time viewers, which I doubt there are any. There's only the hardcore you folks that come and tune in on Monday nights to hang out with me. And I love you, and Katie loves you, and the world loves you. I'm Mr. Rogers. I love all of you. So, I am John Boyer, professor of geography here at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies, although they've not been fighting too terribly well lately. Sorry, everyone, for the bad football pun there. But it's been a trying semester. But I am a professor of geography here at Virginia Tech, answering questions about anything happening in the World Regions class. That's Geog 1014. Specifically, if you have any specific questions, but it's more about, hey, let's hang out and see what's happening on planet Earth. And what are you interested in? What news stories have come across your dashboard in the last week or 2 weeks, I think, since we've done an office hour, that you'd like to chat about? And, of course, I always like to hit up everyone who's tuning in. So Ivan, steadfast Velociraptor viewer, Ivan is here already. First time chatter from CPT Spac Jarrow. I got it. Captain Spac Jarrow. Well played, Spac Jarrow, who says, what's up? What's up to you, Spac? And let's see, Ageneric. I know I never pronounced that. Ageneric is in the house with a Velociraptor. Ageneric replies to Plaid Katie with a Vladimir Putin. Junior Piv up in here saying, howdy, what's up? JR Piv. Shamans saying, what's up? First time chatter from Insurrection Prime. Damn, that's a good screen name. Well played, Insurrection Prime. Low-key Puppy Monkey Baby, also great screen name, is hollering or saying Ola, whichever. I say holla, Ola. I guess holla has another L. First time chatter from Faye Wade. Welcome, Faye Wade, who took the class exactly 10 years ago, my freshman year. Still the same old Professor Boyer I took then. Favorite class I took in my 4 years. Well, thank you, Faye Wade. I'd like to think that I'm the same old John Boyer that you took the class from 10 years ago. However, I am 10 years older. And I am feeling it. Okay, so I'm all caught up. I'll say, Spac Jarrow says, Pirates and Dinos, baby. Pirates and Dinos for life. Thank you, Spac Jarrow. So, what would you all like to talk about tonight? Because there is always something happening in the world that utterly confuses most Americans, if not most people in the world. My classes included, and myself included most of the time. News stories, well, you know what? I'll just pop over. I'll ask you all first. Is there something specific that you would like to chat about or that you would like to ask me a question about. While I address first-time chatter from Wonton Goddess. Oh, that's a great screen name too. Wonton Goddess. I do worship you. Hello from Virginia Tech from Wonton Goddess. Hello back to you, also from Virginia Tech. Although, of course, I am in an undisclosed location somewhere on campus, hidden in a dark fortress in a subterranean basement. What is going on planet Earth that intrigues any or all of you all? And then we can look over at the Google News to see if we can find some stories on it. First time, let's see, Agent Rick says, what's up with Brazil right now? That's on my radar. I'll get to that one. Thank you, Agent Rick. First time chatter from True Nutcase 69. Good screen name, Nutcase. I love it. It's saying hello, first time on stream. Welcome to the stream, first timer Nutcase. Ivan wants to know about Ukraine joining NATO. Okay, I've not heard that that's going to happen, but we can chat about why or why that won't happen. Shaman says, yo, how often do you place my professors happen? I try to do it once a week, but, you know, we all try to do things. But just for you shamans, I will do a Where's Waldo Find Your Place Your Professor at exactly noon time tomorrow. And I'll give you guys a hint if you want the general area where I may be at noon tomorrow when I take that picture. First time chatter from Hey Black. So, have you seen the Vice documentary from years ago called The Cannibal Generals of Liberia? Ooh, no, I have not. Hey Bella. So, hey Bella, can you email me a link to that? Because that sounds fascinating and terrifying. And thanks for the first time chat on that. Your first time chat has terrified me, but I want to watch it now. Only here for the podcast. Welcome back, Only here. Who's saying comments on, presumably Russian, sabotage of pipelines. Actually, I can get to that one first, Only here for the podcast. I don't understand that story at all. Spacjero saying Russia considering nukes. That one will be on the play-by-play here, just a few minutes too. Hey Belek says, I will. Thank you. Agent Eric says, have you watched the Red Penguins documentary? I have not. Agent Eric, send me that one too. I've never heard of Red Penguins unless they're covered in blood and it's a Halloween story. Send me that as well. So, out of the jaws of the orca whale, Red Penguin. Dude, I just invented the future of horror. So, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, Only here for the podcast. We can start with that. I don't really understand that story at all because I can't fathom who would have sabotaged those pipelines. For those of you not in the know, there's something called the Nordstream 2 pipeline. It was going to be a major carrier of natural gas from Russia through the the Baltic Sea. It's an underwater pipeline, and it rises out of the sea into German territory. It was being built for 10 years, on again, off again being built because of politics and economics. And then Russia invaded Ukraine, and everybody said, hey, we shouldn't buy that gas, and this is terrible. And this, by the way, right before Russia invaded Ukraine was right when the Nord Stream 2 was coming online. So it was like getting ready to start. After, I don't know, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of investment to get this thing up and running so Russia could make a ton of money off of more natural gas being pushed to Western Europe at the highest prices that Russia could get for natural gas on planet Earth, going to Western Europe. So Russia invading Ukraine, Europe starting to not buy Russian gas or even Russian oil, Russia storming back saying, by the way, we're not going to sell it to you. So there's this back and forth. But for those of you that don't know what the hell I'm yammering about here, last week, suddenly there was 2 holes in this pipeline that were leaking. And it's been now confirmed this wasn't natural. This was sabotage. But the question is, okay, well, who the hell did that? The U.S., of course, says, well, obviously Russia did it. But in my frame of I just try to logic things through. And so logically, why would Russia blow up its own pipeline that it mostly paid for and was making money off of. Yeah, Russia's Russia. Who the hell knows? But that one's hard for me to wrap my head around. And Russia says, we didn't do it. And then the alternative is, well, somebody from Team West did it. And Russia says the United States did it. In fact, the United States, under U.S. President Joe Biden, threatened to do this a year ago. And there's some tape. You can go find it. And Biden does say, this shizzle ain't going to go down. And if Russia invades Ukraine, all kinds of shit could happen. We're not saying. So the Russians are saying the U.S. did it. That honestly makes more logical sense. The United States was against the Nordstream 2 pipeline for, let me see, 50 years? And why would I suggest they've been against it for, let's call it 40 years? Because I'm so old, my friends, that I actually remember this old geezer named Ronald Reagan, who was the president of the United States 1980 to 1988, and he hated Russians. If there's one thing you need to understand about Ron Reagan, who's now dead, is he hated Russians. He really hated Russia. I mean, he hated Russia. I should say it's the Soviet Union at the time. He hated commies. He really, really hated commies. Have I made this clear yet? Ronald Reagan hated commies. So when Ronald Reagan was president, back then, 40 years ago, Reagan and his administration were all against and kept telling European countries, do not do deals with Russia on oil or natural gas. It's going to come back to bite you in the ass. Don't empower the Soviet Union. It's getting ready to implode anyway. Or actually, the U.S. didn't say that. They didn't know. Even the Reagan administration didn't know that the Soviet Union was getting ready to crash and burn in 1988. But they were saying, hey, look, this is the Cold War. This is our enemy. Don't buy oil and natural gas from them. You will be propping them up by giving them money. And the more money the Russians, the Soviets, make selling gas to you idiots, the more they can arm themselves and build big tank armies and standing armies and nuclear weapons, which will eventually threaten you since you're next door neighbors to them. Honestly, I make a lot of fun of Ronald Reagan, but that was sound foreign policy. Hey, don't buy stuff from your enemy who might come knocking on your door someday. And lo and behold, 40 years later, a lot of people dusted off some of those Reagan lectures from some of his foreign diplomats as well. And they're like, man, they called that shit 40 years ago. And sure enough, 40 years later, the U.S. this entire 40 years has said, don't buy stuff from Russia. Maybe in the 90s, we softened our rhetoric when the Soviet Union collapsed and we thought Russia might join Team West and was encouraged to join Team West. Did you guys know this? Russia was encouraged to join NATO. Russia had a standing seat as a guest in NATO for a long time. They might still have it, by the way. But it was assumed, this is before you guys' time, which is why one of the benefits of being old is you remember shit because you lived through it. So you guys have no recollection of this. But in the mid to late 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was widely thought here in the United States, even by yours truly and many other folks, that, Russia will side up with Team West now. And there was a lot of economic and political back and forth, and Russia embraced democracy a little bit for like a decade until Vladimir Putin took over, and they embraced capitalism. So it was assumed that, we can now buy gas. We can do deals with Russia now because they're more like us. They're not a Soviet communist empire that's threatening world peace. That only lasted for the 90s, though. When Vladimir Putin took over, he played nice for about 5 years, but this is now the year 2005. Vladimir Putin got elected in 99, but just rounded off to the year 2000. So for virtually all of the 20th century, that's the 1900s, the United States and the Soviet Empire, Russia, didn't like each other. Then when the Soviet Union collapsed in, call it 1990, although it was 89, we warmed up for about a decade, and things looked like they were going in another direction. Then rounded off that Vladimir Putin took over in the year 2000. He pretended like that warming was still happening, but it was pretty obvious by the year 2005, 2006, and certainly by 2010 that Vladimir Putin had a whole different direction to take Russia in, and it was back to the way things were in the 20th century. Did I just catch you up? I think I literally just caught you up in 75 years of Soviet-U.S. relations in like 5 minutes. Does that help any of you understand anything that's going on? back to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. During the Reagan era, the U.S. still had animosity towards great Soviet Union and said, don't buy any of this stuff. In the 90s, we softened our tone, but by 2005, it was back on again of, you Europeans should probably wean yourself off of Russian gas and oil because they're not looking too friendly anymore. And if you become reliant on them, you're screwing yourselves. And lo and behold, look what has happened. I'm not saying that the United States is super wicked smart and predicted all this, but there was lots of policy analysts and wonks, again, like me, who were like, it's never good if you're worried about a growing power like Russia that's increasingly hostile to you. You probably shouldn't buy stuff from them and become reliant on stuff from them. And so the last 10 years, the United States returned to the Reagan era of policy of, hey, Western Europe, you should not. And we are actually discouraging the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And we're discouraging Germany, especially the United States, had a lot of friction with Germany because Germany was the one doing this Nord Stream 2 deal with Russia. It's one of the reasons why former President Trump hated Germany. He hated Angela Merkel, and Merkel really hated him too. So this Nord Stream 2 was one of the sticking points of the U.S. saying, hey, we really, really don't want you guys to develop increased reliance on Russian oil and natural gas. And now you're seeing, again, some of this. History has followed that path of like, yeah, that was a bad idea to even build that Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Now back to the pipeline. Who the hell would have blown it up? The Russians would have blown up their own shit? Maybe, because they're making a political point and punishing Europe for not buying more of their natural gas and boycotting their goods, basically, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Russia could have sabotaged its own pipeline in order to be punitive to the Europeans because it's fall and it will soon be winter and it gets cold in Eastern Europe and Northern Europe. And so gas prices and heating oil prices are getting ready to go through the freaking roof. And Russia knows this. So this is one of the ways they could be retaliating. It's like, oh, well, that pipeline, even when you guys get desperate and get super cold, well, that pipeline blew up. So sorry, you guys are screwed. That could be the case. Or Russia could be calling this correctly and saying, hey, the U.S. never liked this pipeline. And Joe Biden threatened covertly to do something to this pipeline. So it's obvious the United States blew up this pipeline in order to sever an economic link that Russia was relying on. I honestly think it's 50-50. I couldn't tell you who the hell did this, and I'm not sure anybody can, except the people who actually did it. So the only reason I'd like to think that the United States didn't have something to do with this is I'd like to think that the United States wouldn't have caused an environmental disaster by blowing up a gas pipeline and having shit tons of natural gas escape. I'd like to think that about our country, but that don't mean it's true just because I'd like to think it. Could there be some other subversives? I don't know. But that pipeline thing, honestly, only here for the podcast, I really don't know. I'm not sure who stands to gain more by that thing being sabotaged. I really don't. That's a draw. That's a mental draw for me. I'm like, yeah, I can make an argument that either side might have done that shit, and we just probably ain't gonna know. All right? So I answered only here for the podcast first with the comments on the sabotage. Let's see. I read Penguins. First time chatter from I Measure from the Taint. Oh my God, what a screen name. I Measure asks, is Blacksburg safe from nukes? No. Plaid Katie has pointed out that the Radford Arsenal, which on a clear, cool day, you could, on our side of town, hear the announcements being made at the Radford Arsenal. The Radford Arsenal is a military supply hub for very specific things. What specific things does the Radford Arsenal make of interest that it would be of interest as a military target? The last time I checked, and things change, But for most of my life, the Radford Arsenal has been one of the biggest producers of nitroglycerin in the United States of America. Nitroglycerin. Does anybody know what you use nitroglycerin for? Has anybody ever worked around nitroglycerin? I certainly hope not. But nitroglycerin is TNT, baby, as Spack Jero correctly points out. It's highly volatile shit that can blow up and blow up big time. So because the Radford Arsenal is a producer of that, it would be on at least a second strike wave if the United States and Russia were to go to full-scale nuclear war. Sorry, I don't know if that makes anybody feel better or worse. But being that close, I don't mind being that close because I'm old and decrepit already. And I have no desire to live through a nuclear war. In fact, I don't even want to know the nuclear war happened. I just want to be evaporated instantly before I know what even hit. I am not a survivor, not at my age. So, the destruction of civilization as we know it, I'm not really that interested. I mean, I do love the movie The Road Warrior. Does anybody know? The Road Warrior is the original name of the movie from the 80s that I grew up in, and now they've renamed it. Can anybody tell me what they renamed in the modern era? What would you all, if you wanted to watch a movie called The Road Warrior, what movie would you go look up? Let's see. Agent Rick says, so basically Russia is never your friend ever. Never your friend ever, as correctly pronounced. Thank you. That could be true, Agent Rick. Although I am open to speculating that under the right leader, Russia could obviously change paths and obviously join Team West. Honestly, for those that defend Russia and especially defend Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the people that defend Russia's invasion of Ukraine have a point. And their point is, the United States and Team West backed Russia up against a wall. They're to blame for this. NATO kept growing. The growth of NATO has threatened Russia, has made Russia feel encircled. It's all the West's fault because they screwed it up. In the 90s, instead of welcoming Russia into the fold, they grew NATO and made it seem threatening to Russia. That's a decent argument to be made. However, I would also counter-argue that, yeah, the U.S. kind of screwed the pooch. The U.S. and Team West. However, NATO is a defensive organization, and Russia has had a seat at NATO for a long time. And Russia's been invited to join NATO, perhaps on again, off again during the 90s. So Russia could have chosen a path that brought it in more alignment with the West, in which case they wouldn't be worried about a confrontation. So again, it's a little bit of he said, she said. We're playing, armchair quarterbacks here. But both parties could have done better to mend relations or strengthen relations between Russia and the West in the 90s. And because both parties could have done things better and both parties could have done things differently, both parties now are to blame. I mean, you can't just say, NATO grew, and so you forced Russia into bombing Ukraine. It's like, well, that's a stretch. That's a bit of a stretch. And the inverse is true, too. The United States and its allies can't just say, Russia just did this. We don't know why. No, you know why. So there's plenty of blame to go around on both sides. And I believe under a different leader, Russia could and should be welcomed into the fold of NATO and Team West. For those who have already taken my class, former students, welcome back. But I've lectured about this in the past, and the chapter in the book kind of suggests this, that Russia sees itself as a very independent player. Russia sees itself as an independent world cultural hearth. It sees itself as its own empire. It sees itself as a world power to be respected. And so Russia, for all of its modern history anyway, at least the last 100 years, if not 200, or if not 300, has said, hey, we don't want to be part of your team. We're so powerful, we're our own team. And they have behaved that way. And not only have they behaved that way, they have resisted from joining other teams. They've never wanted to be fully Western. They've never wanted to be part of the EU. And sometimes they flirt with turning around and making China a strong ally. And then sometimes they turn around and want to be more Western. This is the history of Russia. And right now they're turning more east. They feel like that their independent power status relies or would be better strengthened by being confrontational with the West and embracing China as a partner that treats them as an equal. By the way, let me give you a little side note. This is just Boyer the futurist predicting this. Russia's flirtation with partnering up with China, thinking that China's going to treat them as an equal power, is fanciful at best. And I don't want to offend Russians because I love Russia, actually. It's a great country. Most of the people are super awesome. That's true really everywhere, but Russian culture is to be respected. Russian history is awesome. The Russian climate and terrain is brilliant, magnificent. Russia has tremendous promise in the future, tremendous potential. But anyone in modern Russia, especially in the foreign policy department, that really believes China's going to treat them as an equal is just lying to themselves. China, much like Russia, much like the United States, will look out after its own self-interest first. And China, unlike Russia or the United States, will tilt things to their favor hardcore every chance they get. So China will play a game with Russia right now of like, oh, yeah, we totally respect you. Oh, yeah, the West is screwing you over. Oh, my God. Oh, you're totally equal with us. They do not believe that. No way in hell does China think Russia's an equal with them. But China will play that card and play it well. And they'll say, oh, you're an equal with us, and we're going to do you a favor. Since the West won't buy your oil and natural gas, we'll buy all of it at half price. We'll buy all the stuff that the West is embargo. The West has a huge embargo on you, and so you're losing all this money. We in China love you so much, and you're equals, so we'll buy all that at half price. They will use Russia's particular problematic situation on the world stage totally to their own advantage. And again, all countries do that. But China does it to the max here in the 21st century. So I don't know if that's more offensive to the Russians who think that China's going to be an equal partner with them, or to the Chinese who I'm saying might just take advantage of Russia. I don't know who that offends more, but I want you to understand how the world is, not how everyone wants it to be, or how people would like to interpret a nice world to be. That's it's called realpolitik, a term that Henry Kissinger invented back in the 70s. This is how the world really works, whether anybody says it out loud or not. I want you to understand how the world really works, and that's how that really works. Okay, I'm way behind on comments, though. We haven't even got to other current events yet. Let's see. Only here for the podcast says, what about the timing coinciding with the opening of the Baltic pipeline from Norway to Poland? Not a coincidence, only here for the podcast, but you know this. Spac Jero says, couldn't they just shut the line off? They have shut the line off, Spac Jero, but again, it's an intentional sabotage. So as the oil pipeline gets cut, the gas pipeline gets cut off, no gas flows while they have to fix it. And if this has happened once, it will likely happen again. And Spac Joe says, that's like me blowing up my house to protest lockdown. I agree. I think it would be strange if it was the Russians behind it, but one should never rule out what one does not understand, and that maybe is never going to be proven who actually was behind it. Agent Eric says, maybe some anarchist blew it up just to make everybody angry. Equally plausible. Baldwin Legrand says, what if China did it? Sure, Baldwin, that's a good one. China might have done it because they know the less gas or oil Russia can sell to the West, the cheaper price that China can get it at. Sure, why not China? Anarchist China, the United States, who knows? Maybe it was the Luxembourgians, those crafty devils. Let's see. Spac Jero says, actually, yes, nitroglycerin also is used for heart attacks. Yeah, you're right, Spac Jero. That's a good one for causing them, but it's also like some sort of medicinal component. I don't understand any of this shit. Let's see. My grandfather, low-key puppy monkeys, baby's grandfather used to work there. Yeah, it's a toxic-ass place, by the way. It's super secretive, and it's super toxic. I've known people that have worked there have told horror stories, and I'm like, I wouldn't eat any fish out of that river. By the way, I wouldn't dabble too close to that plant for extended periods of time. The Blind Barber hits me up saying, have you seen the movie Threads? I have not. Please send me a link to that, Blind Barber. Never heard of it. Age Generic Name One says, Mad Max. You're close, Age Generic. That's in reference to what is the Road Warrior now called. First time chatter from Lisa Lasita. Oh, that's a great screen name. Lisa Lasita. Thank you for your first time chatter, and looks like some clapping. I'm not even sure what you're clapping for because I'm so behind on the chats. But thank you for them. X Souls Born says, I've only seen the Road Warrior movie with Tom Hardy. Oh yeah, that's the fourth installment of the Road Warrior series. That's number 4. You need to see the first 3, baby. Although Tom Hardy kicks ass, and I did like the 4th one too. Low Key Puppy Monkey Baby says it was Ohio. I don't know what the hell that's in reference to. The 25th Jaw says, where is this? What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Where is it? And it's Ohio, and someone says green apple flavored fish. I am now wildly confused. But Agent Eric's got it now. Mad Max 2 Electric Boogaloo. That is a awesome double 80s reference. Thank you, Agent Eric. That just made my day. It is Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. It just was The Road Warrior when it came out. And it was Mel Gibson's finest work. He should have retired then in early 80s instead of making a bunch of more bad movies. Lisa Lasita is saying hello from Seattle. Hello, West Coast. West Coast Hokies. And the 25th Jaw says, wait, never mind. Yes, I did never mind because I don't know Ohio or green apple flavored fish. I got nothing on any of that shit. Okay, but let's go to the presentation mode because some of you asked for some other stories. So let's look and see what other stories are out there right now that are number 1 popping on planet Earth. And some of the first ones up here are, I'll start with, we were talking about Russia, so we'll stick with Russia for 2 seconds and talk about what's happening with Russia. And Russia is currently losing a war with a power that is 1/10 to 1/20 of its size. And this plays into whoever asked me that Vladimir Putin is threatening to use nukes. What has happened, all this is the same story. What has happened in the last couple weeks since we last Pladcast was, or Twitch Pladcast, whichever you want to call it. What has happened in the last 2 weeks is that the last Pladcast I did, I was talking about Russia said they're going to do some elections, some referendums in the territories of Ukraine that they controlled militarily since they invaded 8 months ago. And they were holding what everybody else was calling sham elections. And they went out door to door and opened up polls and then actually beat on people's doors and said, hey, do you want to vote to be part of Russia? Or click, click with a gun to your head, do you want to vote to not be part of Russia? So these were sham elections that, and for those of you that watched 2 weeks ago, I might have predicted it. I said something to the effect of, these are sham elections. And what you're going to see is because when dictators and autocrats run elections, they can never do things even remotely close to looking legitimate. Their ego gets the best of them. And so I said this election / referendum will result in 95, 96, or 98% of people saying, yes, we love Mother Russia. We want to be part of Russia. And lo and behold, what did the polls show after the referendum? 96, 97, 98% of people polled in these 4 regions of Ukraine said they wanted to join Russia. It's like, dude, at least make it like 60-40 you won. At least pretend like it's a vote, but they can't even do that. They're like, no, everybody loves us. Everybody loves the dictator. Let's hold a vote for a dictator. Oh, 100% of people love the dictator. Like, of course they do, because they don't want to get shot.
Got their hand raised saying
Yes, all those raise hand who don't support us. Again, click, click. So not really shocking. What then happened, and it actually happened today, was Vladimir Putin made a speech a few days ago saying, oh, lo and behold, everybody loves Russia and wants to join Russia. I mean, who doesn't? So we will recognize this. This is all now part of Mother Russia. We're officially annexing them. And then what happened today was in the Russian Duma, the equivalent of Congress, except they just do whatever Putin wants instead of actually doing what people want. They officially said, yes, it's official. Make the new maps. These are 4 new parts of Russia. Or is it 5? I think it's 4 new parts of Russia. And I think that brings their state total up to like 98. I think there are now 98 sub-states of Mother Russia. For those of you who are confused by that, how many states are in America? Yeah, there's 50 states in a single sovereign state called the United States of America. In Russia, now there's either 97 or 98 sub-states of Mother Russia. So that happened today. Meanwhile, at the battlefront, the Ukrainian forces actually pushed Russians out of a couple of major cities, both in the northeast, and they're on the offensive. This is the Ukrainian troops are on the offensive in the south, and they're threatening in the south to break through and isolate part of the Russian army, which means they could surround them. So this is early to call, by the way. I'm not saying a lot of liberal news sources and pro-Western news sources, and I'm pro-Western, but a lot of folks get caught up in the moment, including reporters and politicians. So a lot of the news you're seeing now is like, oh my God, Ukraine's winning. Ukraine's going to win. And you're like, slow down. Let's be realistic here. This isn't anywhere near over. Because also what happened as Russia started to lose ground a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, was that Putin called up 300,000 reservists and basically started a draft. So they're going to send 300,000 troops to this area from Russia. So this is still a long game. Ukraine is doing quite well right now, better than anybody thought they could, but that don't mean they're going to win. And even if they do, part of the reason why Russia annexed these 4 areas is because now Vladimir Putin, I would say the Russian government, but let's just face it, it's Vladimir Putin. He is the Russian government. Everybody else is just puppets. They're just there to clap when he says something. So Vladimir Putin is the Russian government. And so now Vladimir Putin can say, hey, we already told you guys, those 4 areas that we just annexed are part of Mother Russia. And now when Ukrainian army invades, they're invading Russia, which means we will use all our weapons and defenses and power to protect the motherland. You're invading our country now. Again, it's comical, I know. Russia just invaded them 8 months ago, and now Russia's saying, no, we're not invading you. You're invading us. And you're like, okay, buddy, that's cool, whatever. So the reason why this is important is because Vladimir Putin in the last week has made veiled threats that when these areas are part of Mother Russia, as we're claiming there are, and Ukraine tries to take them over, which they are currently doing at the moment, then we, Mother Russia, have to defend Mother Russia, and we can use nuclear weapons to do that. That's why all of this is getting ramped up, and a lot of folks are worried about an escalation in which Russia uses a tactical nuclear weapon and blows up part of Ukraine, and that the U.S. or NATO countries will somehow respond. And if they respond, then it's World War III, and good night, everybody, I'm done. So we all are hoping that doesn't happen, but the stage is set for this to get out of control. A former general, 5-star general, General Petraeus. I don't know if you know who that dude is. Actually, let's look him up. Gen Petraeus. He came out on Meet the Press, I think, yesterday, and said and I'm not sure why he would do this. He's not an active military guy, so it's just his opinion. But he came out yesterday saying if Russia uses any nuclear weapon at all, tactile or otherwise, or tactical or otherwise, the United States will likely go in and utterly destroy all Russian troops on the ground, and very likely blow up and sink every single Russian ship on the Crimean Peninsula and the Black Sea. Now, why this guy would say that, I don't know, but it's getting a lot of press, and it is certainly making Russia think twice, but this is the type of talk that escalates into a full-scale nuclear war. So I don't know where this is going. Nobody really does. Some of the more interesting angles of this for me that I want you to think critically about, or that Petraeus and others in the U.S. Have suggested that, hey, well, let me clear the table first. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Somebody did ask me, is Ukraine going to become a member of NATO? Not yet. Ukraine would love to be a member of NATO, because if Ukraine became a member of NATO tomorrow, then if Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons on them, then NATO countries would all unify and blow up Russia. And then, of course, Russia would blow them up and we'd all die. But Ukraine, as far as I know, no one really is being serious about getting Ukraine into NATO. For the very reason we all understand, and NATO countries understand, that if we were to do that, we might as well be declaring war on Russia. Let me make this perfectly clear. Any move by Team West, the United States, or Team West, or NATO, to actually induct Ukraine into NATO is basically a declaration of war on Russia. Again, we can bandy about words and be like, well, you didn't really say that. But this is how the world really works. That is a declaration of war on Russia. And no one in the West really wants to do it, except maybe General Petraeus and a few other hawks. So that's not going to happen. The United States and NATO countries are funneling in tons of money and guns and perhaps tanks and perhaps aircraft and even perhaps bombs and radar into Ukraine. And that should be enough. And that's definitely one of the reasons why Ukraine is starting to push back against the Russian presence right now. It's not because Ukraine is so super awesome, they just finally figured out how to do it. It's because they now have tons of weapons and, this is mostly important, intelligence that's being supported or supplied by NATO countries and the United States. Ukraine on its own, no offense to the Ukrainians, Ukraine on its own would not 8 months later be in a situation of pushing back and winning some of this war against Russia. It could not do that on its own. But now it's getting, again, a lot of money, guns, radar, and intelligence. So now Ukraine is being fed, hey, here's where all the Russian troops are. Hey, here's where the Russian troops are moving. Hey, we can show you where all the tanks are. Hey, we can show you second by second where all intelligence is crucial to win a war. And they're getting a lot of that from the United States and NATO countries. So, and by the way, to go back to what I was saying earlier, of don't be writing this war off yet that Ukraine is winning right now, so they're going to win. And it's actually very possible that Ukraine will get too excited and push too far ahead into Russian-occupied territory, basically biting off more than they can chew and setting themselves up for a quick strategic reversal if Russia decides to really send 300,000 people there like next week. So you don't want to overextend your forces on the front line for fear you're taking on more than you can defend when the rubber hits the road. So this ain't over, and likely the United States and NATO countries are probably telling the Ukrainian military, slow down, slow down. You're doing good, but slow and steady wins this race. Don't be trying to break through and ram through and take over too much stuff. You guys aren't ready for that yet. This is just me pretending like I'm a battlefield expert. I'm not. So that's what's going on with Russia. That's what's going on with Putin's veiled nuclear threats. Oh, and to get back to a threat I was talking about with Petraeus and others, one of the more interesting things for you all to think about is that Petraeus and now other people in NATO countries are saying is that, hey, if Russia were to actually use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and actually they might use one even on Poland, which is a NATO member, so they likely wouldn't, but they might do it very close to Polish border. And why would they do that? Because they'll likely bomb something that's a strategic military lifeline into Ukraine. So as I said, they're funneling tons of money and guns and bombs and missiles and tanks into Ukraine. Russia knows where they're at, and some of these are coming from Poland. And so it's very likely that Russia will do a bombing campaign, and soon, and maybe with a nuclear weapon, to cut off one of those strategic supply points that's going into Ukraine. Now, the interesting thing for you all to consider is that, again, what people in NATO countries are starting to say out loud. And this is what's intriguing to me and food for thought. We're starting to talk about, okay, Ukraine is not a NATO member. Got it. Russia can bomb Ukraine and NATO won't do anything about it. Also true. Besides what we're already doing, supplying them. However, if Russia uses a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and especially if they use a nuclear weapon near the borders of other countries in Ukraine, it could technically still be detonated in Ukraine. But if it's 5 miles from the Polish border, the nuclear radiation fallout will not be contained to the political border of Ukraine. That's like saying, yes, it's only going to rain in Poland today. No, rain is rain. It happens. And so if Russia is to detonate a nuclear weapon and there is radiation fallout and pollution that goes into a NATO country, this is new ground. These are things no one has thought about before and no one has talked out loud about before. And it has to be making Russia rethink their veiled threat. If you're still not following what I'm saying, if Russia detonates a nuclear weapon inside of Ukraine and then meteorological phenomena called winds and atmosphere carry radiation and pollute and kill people in Poland, could that be interpreted as an attack on a NATO country and countered by NATO Article 5? Boom! Mic drop. That is interesting. And I actually think it has some validity. These things don't stay put. You're not going to poison and bomb one part of the world and think it's only going to affect that. And the argument could and likely will be made at NATO, and they're probably talking about it already. What do we do if that happens? What do we do if that happens? Do we consider that an act of war? Do we consider it an act of aggression on a NATO country? Do we respond in kind? Do we tell Vladimir Putin right now, if you do that, we will respond in kind? These are arguments, these are debates that are certainly occurring in Brussels. Why in Brussels? Because that's where NATO headquarters are. We've been to them, haven't we, Katie? We went to NATO headquarters. It was awesome, and they had some mean-ass German shepherds patrolling that that territory. Okay, that's what I wanted you to think about. That's what's interesting about, I shouldn't say interesting because, it's death and destruction and mayhem, so it's never interesting. But these are the issues that we and you young people need to think about in the modern era. This is with technology increasing and the technologies of death increasing, the idea, no one's ever talked about this, not to my knowledge. No one, I've never heard anybody talk about the fallout factor from a nuclear attack going into another country, and how would that be dealt with. No one's really talked about that before. And this is not science fiction, my friends. This is a true reality. For those of you that know anything about the Chernobyl incident, when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred, what year was that, 87? It was first detected in what's now Poland, Hungary, Austria, all the way to Sweden. The reason why the West knew that Chernobyl had happened was obviously some satellite imagery, but we didn't really know what we were seeing until they started to detect radioactive fallout as far away as Sweden. And so old Vladdy boy's got to think about that. He can say, we're just going to blow up Ukraine because we hate them and we want to take it. But the repercussions go further afield. And so will the counter repercussions, right? Food for thought. Back to the chat room. Sorry, I've ignored the chat room for so long. Let's see. Ivan says, come on, Russia. And Lisita says, exactamundo. Only here for the podcast says was one referendum result I saw was 99.13%. Yep, you're right. I love that decimal to make it sound believable. That's right. 0.87 people in that one region voted against joining Russia, and they're now dead. So it's actually 100% of people in that region that wanted to join Russia. The 25th Ja, back up on the Hizzle, saying, do you think more Eastern European states are going to join NATO? No, they won't, 25th Ja, because they're already in it. Almost all Eastern European countries that used to be part of Great Soviet Union are now in NATO. And by the way, they're having no regrets at all about joining NATO, given what happened to Ukraine, who didn't join NATO. So the only countries you have left in Eastern Europe that are not part of NATO are Belarus, which is basically going to be reabsorbed by Russia probably next year. Anytime Vladimir Putin needs to pump up his own ego, he's just going to say, we hold a referendum in Belarus. 100% of Belarusians want to join Russia. That's going to happen. I'm actually surprised that hasn't happened already. Because Belarus is run by another dictator who doesn't give a shit about his people. So Belarus, and then you have a few other countries down, say, in the former Yugoslavia, and a few other countries in Transcaucasia. So places like Georgia that really wants to join NATO, perhaps Azerbaijan. Actually, no, Azerbaijan doesn't want to join NATO. Armenia would be a good one to join NATO, but they're actually a Russian ally. So really, everybody that wants to join NATO besides Ukraine and Georgia is already in. No one else would even consider it, doesn't really want to. The question is, will what's left of Ukraine join NATO? Again, no, because no one's trying to antagonize Russia and basically declare war on Russia by allowing Ukraine into NATO. Georgia's another one. It's like, I don't know that they will want to join NATO, but I don't know that they will be allowed to because, again, not trying to antagonize Russia. There's precedent here, by the way, 25th job. And everyone, there's precedent for this. Finland intentionally did not join NATO just after World War II. They were invited to. They're a pro-Western country. They're part of Europe. They've been part of the EU. Why didn't Finland join NATO? Because it was agreed upon by NATO countries and Russia that would be pushing, building a bridge too far. And even Finland said, look, we're not trying to start World War III. Hey, Russia, hey, NATO. Obviously, Russia, we would like to join NATO, but we're not trying to antagonize you, so we will just be neutral. It's cool. And Finland did that for 50 years until Russia just invaded Ukraine. And then Finland said, oh, wait a minute, we're going to join now. So Ukraine and Georgia are in that category of they want to partner with NATO and likely will be partnering with NATO for the rest of my life, but they won't officially join NATO because, again, that would be antagonistic to Russia. Let's see. 25th Jaw says, I know you said in the lectures you didn't think they would, but has your stance changed after the events of the past few months? I just answered the rest of your question. Georgia would very much like to join NATO. Probably not going to happen, but you will see a lot more communications between NATO countries and Georgia, and perhaps even military assistance from NATO countries to Georgia. So you're going to see bridges built, but you won't see an invitation to join NATO. And obviously what's happening in Ukraine is what I just described already. There's already military cooperation between all NATO countries in Ukraine. There's already information lines open. There's already trade between those countries. There's already military assistance going to them. So that's probably going to be enough. Them actually joining the club is almost of no consequence. They're getting all the benefits from it already, but without antagonizing Russia to the point of declaring war on Russia. Let's see. Ivan says, I think Ukraine submitted an application to NATO a couple days ago. Oh, Ivan, they've been submitting an application to NATO for the last 20 years. Every day for 20 years, they've said they want to join. Let's see. Spac Joe says, subtle nuclear response. U.S. might do a first strike on Russia if they use nukes. Yeah, there's no such thing as a subtle nuclear response. I mean, have you seen the movie The Hunt for Red October? It doesn't matter if it comes out of the water or from the air. If it happens, everyone knows it's from the United States. It's not going to be a secret. unless the French decide to launch a nuke, which I seriously doubt. And the United Kingdom ain't going to do it because they're basically nuclear bombing themselves right now with economic policy. So they're not doing anything either. Oh my gosh. Poor the United Kingdom. It's neither united nor a kingdom anymore. That place is in trouble. And I can talk about that if you like, although we're running out of time. Mexican Goose up in the house. Welcome back, Mexican Goose. Who says, earlier today in another class, I asked what if we are experiencing right now is how U.S. citizens felt in the 1939-1940s. I was just curious of your thought of that statement. And secondly, you may have answered it in the first 30 minutes. Who blew up the pipeline? I did. I tried to, Mexican Goose, and my answer was, but your first part of your question, what is what we are experiencing right now, how the U.S. citizens felt in 1939-1940? How so, Mexican Goose? I'm not sure I understand. You mean how people are feeling in the U.S. right now about government or the economy or Russia? Just give me a little bit more there of what you mean by, is this similar to how people felt in 1939, 1940? Let's see. And Spac Jero says, in reference to that, probably... Oh, I lost the thread, darn it. Sorry, my thing moved. Probably similar to the Cold War under subtle nuclear threat. Well, Mexican Goose, if you're talking about how did or how people are feeling now, say compared to 1939, 1940 about joining a war, I think that's maybe where you're going. That most citizens of the United States in the 30s and even going into the 40s were very much anti-war. But anti-war sounds like you're a peace lover. No. It wasn't that the average American really loved peace. The average American in 1939 was watching what Hitler was doing, going, I don't think we have any business getting involved in that. Yeah, that guy's scary and a psychopath, but not our problem. We got our own problems. We shouldn't get involved in that. It's not in the strategic interest of the United States to get involved in a land war in Eurasia. Famous words from The Princess Bride. So most Americans were against U.S. involvement in what would become World War II. And it actually took the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor in 1941 to change the American citizens, the average American citizen's mind on that. And the government. The government was reflecting its population's sentiment. And at the time, although I was not alive, although I feel like I'm old enough to have been, the sentiment of the Roosevelt administration was, hey, we want to save Europeans. We have natural alliances with the UK, with France, with Italy. Those are our people. That's our descendants. Those are our trade partners. They're democracies. The government wanted to get into World War II much sooner, but it was reflecting the stance of its citizens. And FDR was like, hey, man, I can't just unilaterally send 2 or 3 million soldiers to their deaths when most Americans don't want to do it. There will be big pushback on that, which may make it worse. And he was probably right. I.e., see what Vladimir Putin's doing right now in a very unpopular war in his country that he suddenly just told 300,000 people where you're going to go perhaps get shot for something I feel like doing. So that's also a similarity. But Mexican Goose, I actually wouldn't say that's the average stance of the average American right now. I think that on both sides of the aisle, even though the United States is extremely polarized, everybody hates each other's guts, there are conservative folks and hawkish folks that are on the conservative side that have never warmed up to Russia. Remember, Ronald Reagan, who I told you an hour ago, really, really, really hated commies? He was a Republican. And so everyone who was a Reagan supporter back in the 80s and a Bush supporter in the 90s, they still have amongst that group, there's still a large anti-Soviet, anti-Russia sentiment. And as Russia has gotten more belligerent and bellicose and aggressive in the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of those old codgers are like, see, we were right. Russia's not to be trusted. So you have a big component of conservatives, although not Trump conservatives, actually. I won't say Trump conservatives. There's conservative Republicans, the core that used to be the Republican Party. They would like the United States to support Western countries and NATO. The Trump Republicans, that's a different breed of animal altogether that none of us recognize. And they don't give a shit about anything. I'm not sure what foreign policy the Trump supporters are for, because I don't think they care. And I'm making broad generalizations. It's hard to pin it down, though. Trump himself was actually very pro-Russian and wanted to mend relations with Russia, which, by the way, if you think I'm being anti-Trump, I'll tell you straight up, I thought it was kind of a good idea. I was like, wow, that's a kind of radical, but you know what? Him and Putin are very similar people, and if they get along, it could be a new era of U.S.-Russian relations that might change things. That didn't happen. And here we are with Russia invading another country. Russia was actually quite foolish. They really should have invaded Ukraine when Trump was president, because he would have done anything. I mean, he would have supported him. So there's a contingent on the conservative Republican side that is still semi-anti-Russian, or at least supports Europe and Western allies. And then there's the liberal component on the left, as seen by Joe Biden, who says very outright, no, we don't trust Russia, we don't like what's going on, and we're pro-democracy and pro-liberal human rights, and so we're going to support these people. So I think, even between the extremes of the United States political thought, there's still a majority that's like, no, we should be doing something to help Ukraine. And even if you don't want to help Ukraine, we should be standing up to Russia, because if we don't, all of Europe could fall, and now it's looking like something like Nazi Germany's rise again. Again, for us old people, or historians, if you understand history, like that's how the Third Reich started, although not exactly like it, but a land grab of taking over areas of Europe that they thought were their own. That's how the Third Reich started World War II. They're like, this is ours, and this is ours, and Poland, this is ours. And that's kind of what Vladimir Putin's doing. They're like, no, Ukraine's ours. And Belarus, ours. So this is a similar, I'm not calling Putin and his supporters Nazis. I'm saying it's a similar strategy of saying, we're just taking back land in Europe that was ours anyway. And this is not lost on old Americans, because they're saying, that's how Nazi Germany started World War II, was just taking over parts of Europe they thought were theirs. Very similar situations, although radically different in all other ways. So old folks are like, yeah, we should stand up to Russia, because to not stand up to Russia won't bode well. And we need to stand up to them sooner rather than later, or it's not going to end nicely for all of Europe and possibly the world. I don't even remember what the question was. Oh, was that one from Mexican Goose? All right. Hopefully that answered your question, Mexican Goose. I would not say that a average U.S. citizen is thinking the same way now as they were doing back in the 30s and 40s. Let's see. Baldwin Legrand, what a great name, says, immediately after a Russian invasion, you said that Ukraine would be defeated and annexed by Russia in the end. Do you still hold that opinion? I do not. I stand corrected, Baldwin Legrand. Thank you for pointing that out. I, like many others, again, just using logic, and logic does not always win in the end. It can't predict the future. It can only predict, basically, what are the odds? And logic will get you about, well, it's probably 90% odds this is going to happen. And so the logic on day one of this war was Russia is 10 to 20 times more powerful than Ukraine. Russia's 50 or 100 times bigger than Ukraine. Russia has tremendous clout at its disposal. It has nuclear weapons. It has tactical jets. It's got every single piece of warfare. Russia is one of the most heavily armed militaries on planet Earth. Logically, there's no way they're losing this war. But things change in life, and not everything is predictable. So I believe Vladimir Putin, and again, I would say Russians or the Russian state, but it's just Vladimir Putin. His opinion is the only one that matters. I believe Vladimir Putin on day one of this war, truly in his heart of hearts, believed that the average Ukrainian would roll over and play dead. that they would just be like, crap, Russia's here. Okay, we give up. And he also believed in his heart of hearts that the United States and other Western countries were going to sit by and not do anything. He truly believed that. And both of those things have turned out to be completely and utterly wrong. And now you're introducing the human capacity to change history has been introduced into this equation. And there's passion that's been introduced into this equation. And now the Ukrainians are winning. They're simply having survived for 7 months is like a win for them. So passion changes the equation of things, much like a football game, much like any sports game. Once a team is winning, it's hard to stop them. And so at the end of the day now, I'd say the logical prediction is that Vladimir Putin may cut his losses and try to get the hell out of this and say, we claimed 4 areas of Ukraine. They're ours. And that's all we wanted anyway. We win. He has to get out by saying he won something. And so they can say, we really only wanted that corridor of land in eastern Ukraine that goes all the way down and connects to the Crimean Peninsula. That was our tactical goal, and we won. We're done. He could do that. That would be the logical out for him. But again, logic does not always win the day when passion and personal beliefs are worked into the equation, especially by a guy who's closing on being a megalomaniac. So it's hard to see how this goes, but it's certainly not going to go the way Russia wanted it to. I now, 7 or 8 months ago, I would have said, no, Ukraine will be absorbed by Russia, or at least the entire eastern half of Ukraine will be absorbed by Russia. For those of you, Baldwin LeGrand, I don't remember which podcast you're referring to, but I talked about it a couple different times, and I said at one point, you could see Vladimir Putin literally just taking the eastern half of Ukraine and the southern half of Ukraine to connect up the Crimean Peninsula and reaching that southern half all the way over to Moldova, which they want to take over too, which has Russians in it. And he could take all that and just be like, we're done, and the rest of Ukraine can be free. I think that's still possible for the Russians, and Vladimir Putin and his military generals probably wish they'd have just done that. But it now seems highly unlikely that they'll even get that, and it seems highly unlikely that they're going to get all of Ukraine. In fact, I would say there's no way in hell they're getting all of Ukraine at this point. Their original political gambit, which they thought was going to go quickly, did not. And now the NATO countries, led by the United States, have now funneled so much money, guns, weapons, and intelligence into Ukraine that it's now an impossibility that Russia takes it over in its entirety unless they start a serious bombing campaign, which may involve nuclear weapons. That, again, I'm saying it's 100% that all of Ukraine will not fall. There's no way it's happening. But he starts using nuclear bombs. I mean, hell, I don't know. All bets are off, or we're in World War III. Again, these are things that start to get hard to predict if they start to spiral out of control. Let's see. Mexican Goose says, "I wonder if we'll start having duck and cover drills again." Hell yeah, let's get it on. I want to play duck goose and cover drills. Mexican Goose. Falafel Waffle says, "Mutual destruction." That's right, MAD, mutually assured destruction. One of my favorite political acronyms. And Spac Jero says, Fukushima. That's a reference to what I talked about with Chernobyl earlier. A Generic says there aren't there NATO joining rules around having contested territories. There might be A Generic, but the way NATO works is that all NATO members, 100% of them, sit around a table and just talk about issues. So they don't even have to have rules. It has to be 100% consensus. All countries have to be on board for whatever they do. And they don't need rules to say no. There's no rule that's like, there's no contested territory, so no one can say no. Absolutely not. Anyone can say no to anything NATO does at any given time, and if any single country says, no, we don't want to do that, NATO's not doing it. So they don't need rules. X Soulsborne says, assuming no WW3, what do you think would happen with Russia's leadership when Putin passes? That's funny you asked that, Soulsborne. I saw a show about that earlier today with a bunch of experts, academics, people that study this for a living. And the conclusion was, we don't know. The problem with dictators that get ultimate power, like Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un, the problem is when they die, they hold all the cards and give no power to no one. And they're not a democracy, and they're not even a monarchy. So most political systems, including monarchy, have a transfer of power system of rules. Dictators don't. Dictators have all the power, and they don't have any rules. So it's all great and dandy when they're alive. It's good to be the king, as the old saying goes. When they die, no one knows what the hell to do. So if Putin were to have a massive heart attack tonight in his sleep, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, KGB, it would be utter chaos and anarchy in Russia for a while before anybody figured out what the hell, all right, who's taking over and how do we pick this person? Let's see. Yes, Bobblezar, I think I got Goose's thought down. And Mexican Goose is responding. Edge of war, deal conflicts. I think I answered all that. Did I answer that appropriately for you, Mexican Goose, now that I see all the comments you made? Yep. Spac Jero says, for me, I would say sort of. When conflict started, people around the world did volunteer to fight in Ukraine. We're all in the same thing. So I think I answered that question adequately. Let's see. Mexican Goose says, are we today viewing the Ukraine invasion a different way, more or less serious than Poland? Okay. That's okay, Mexican Goose. I was just spouting before I even saw all your comments, but I think I answered them appropriately. Baldwin Legrand thanks me for my answer and reasoning. Haven't watched too many streams since the beginning of the invasion, so I was curious. And also says I was referring to the first streams right after the invasion near Kiev, when it was not clear United States supported from in the West yet. Yes. Agent Eric says maybe Putin will get voted out in 2024. Oh my God, that's hilarious, Agent Eric. Putin getting voted out. I love it. Scooter McGavin up in the hizzle saying, what's Turkey's position in Ukraine? Seems like they're playing both sides. You are correct, Scooter McGavin. Also, what's up with Greece versus Turkey tensions? There's little coverage. That's a whole nother podcast. Turkey and Greece have hated each other for a millennium. So, so that one would take some unwinding that I don't have time for since we're already 10 minutes over our office hours. And Mexican Goose gives me the yep, heads up. The only other thing I will say is that maybe you all saw this story as well, is that there's an election going on right now in Brazil. It actually happened last night. And I will end the Pladcast, Twitchcast, by catching you up on it in less than 60 seconds. Here's how easy it is. So, an election occurred last night in Brazil. There was a super right-wing guy that's detested by half the country, and there's a super left-wing guy which is detested by the other half of the country. Does this sound familiar to you at all? Does this resonate at all, that there's two candidates which are polarizing the society, and that the right-wing guy says, if I don't win, it means the left-wing people cheated? Does this resonate at all? If you're saying this sounds exactly like the last election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, you are correct. And that's exactly what just happened last night. It is uncanny, as Soulsborne says. In fact, if you start to look at the numbers, it is wildly uncanny how close the vote was in Brazil. And I mean, the numbers of people that supported the left wing versus the right wing are almost identical to the last American election for president, of who supported the left versus the right. Almost identical. It might have been a little closer in the United States, but not by much. And you have to factor in our weird-ass, completely undemocratic electoral college bullshit system that makes things seem closer than they are. But popular vote-wise, it was a replay of the last U.S. election. Unlike the United States, in Brazil, the person has to win outright, has to win a majority of votes of the citizens in order to be declared the winner. Meaning, to become president of Brazil, you have to win at least 50% of the vote. You have to win 50.1% of the vote. And this is straight. None of this electoral college nonsense shit. And so what happens in Brazil, and many other countries do it this way too, if one single candidate does not get 50.1% of the vote, then they have what's called a runoff. And the top 2 vote winners go to a runoff. So yesterday's election had 13 people running in it. Lula da Silva is the left-wing guy who used to be president a long time ago and is beloved by the West. They call it a communist by the right wing. The right-wing guy is the current president named Bolsonaro. You've probably heard many stories about him. They call him the Trump of the tropics. He is Donald Trump, but in Brazil, in every way, shape, and form, and all of his attitudes about society, norms, religion, racism, all of it. He's just Trump in Brazil. And so it really polarized the society. And by the way, just like in the United States, the pollsters got it completely wrong, just like in the United States. Remember, like 6 years ago when it was predicted Hillary Clinton had already won the election before it was ran because the left's going to win. The left's going to win. All the polls say the left's going to win. That's exactly what just happened in Brazil. All the polls and all the newspapers are like, nope, it's going to be a runaway election for the left. It was not. It was a dead heat, which means it's going to a runoff on October 30th. The fear now is that Bolsonaro, the Trump of the tropics, again, doing the exact same thing Donald Trump did, is saying, if I don't win, I'm going to say it was we were cheated. And he's already said this last election was cheated. I should have won. I should have won 100%. You're like, okay, this modern phenomena of if I don't win, it's rigged. You're like, that's what a child says. I didn't win at Monopoly. You cheated. It's like, no, there's no cheating going on here. It was a close election. And so he's already said, if I don't win, it's obviously cheating, and I'm going to call for my supporters to burn the country down. You're like, oh, Jesus. So again, the analogies between what's happening in Brazil and what already happened in the United States are eerily similar. And now, a worst case scenario for Brazil, quite frankly, now they have 30 more days, actually 24 days or 27 days and counting before the runoff on October 30th. In which time both candidates will try to rally enough support to get over the 50% mark. But also it gives Bolsonaro, the current president, time to maybe plot a coup, set things in motion, be prepared to do a January 6th Capitol riot. He has 27 days to do all the horrible things that he wants to possibly do if he doesn't win. I'm not suggesting he's going to do that, but he's got 27 days to do it. And it's 27 more days of agony for the Brazilian population that has to suffer through more of this shit we call elections before we get a decisive outcome. So, Godspeed to you Brazilians, and hopefully your candidate wins. It's a polarized society identical to the United States. Both sides detest each other and saying it's the end of days if the other side wins. All of society will crumble and we're all going to die. It's like, yeah, that's the United States too. So that's the rundown on what happened in Brazil, and we'll revisit this on October 30th. Let's do a live podcast on October 30th as the results unfold. But now it's 9:18, 10 minutes, 20 minutes over. So thank you, Mexican Goose. Ivan says, a speed run of Brazil election. Hopefully that helped. Agent Eric is USA, USA, USA. Souls born with the uncanny. Ivan jumping in with the USA. God bless America, says Agent Eric. Low key, Puppy Monkey Baby says, America! A pet frog is LOLing, and Ivan says win equals win, but lose equals cheat. That's correct. Soggy 1001. I know I went over 60 seconds. Thank you all so much. Sorry if I didn't get to the news story you wanted to hear. America, America, America. Let's see if there are any others that were crazy, but we'll get, there's a lot of shit happening in Iran. So let's give it another week and see where Iran is, because that is a society that, much like the Ukrainian war, right this second, I'll tell you, no, the odds are against anything happening. Logically, the Iranian government will continue to quash, crush, smash, and destroy people who want change in that society, and they're going to win because they have the military. But that's what I said about Russia and Ukraine, and I was wrong. So Iran is a society on the brink, and a lot of shit is hitting a lot of fans. And this time next week, it could implode and melt down. Likely not, but it could. So let's revisit Iran as the top story next week and see where they're at. And as always, email me or text me or whatever me, or put it on Twitch, stories you'd like me to talk about for next week's Office Hour Online, the World News Roundup, if you want to rename it that. And thank you all for hanging out with me, as always, here on the Twitchcast, the Plaid Twitchcast. Have a great night, a great week, and a fantastic life if you never tune back in. But for now, as always, party on.